what your choices have been, and what karmic timelines and contracts you have journeyed. The light is calling for the reunification of all aspects of life in this realm now. It is calling for the cleansing of all polarities. It is calling for the rising of all sacred heart centers now. All are being summoned home to the greater light now. Hi, and welcome everyone to a joint podcast today for Whole Soul Mastery and Whole Soul School and Foundation. We share it on both channels. And I am here with Joel Michael today. We podcasted 3 years ago, I think. We talked about the ego and the witness observer and some wonderful vibrational morsels of what makes our lives so rich right now in these times. And I want to thank you for joining me, and we're going to journey into some fun stuff today. Yeah, thanks, Joel, for joining me.
Thank you. Always, it's just I love connecting with you always, Marie, in any way that I possibly can, and looking forward to this discussion. I have been for a long time, and I feel like we've been having, like I said, we're having it across with messaging and stuff, and now we get to really go back and forth with it a lot more, a lot juicier.
Right, it is juicier. Well, that's for our listeners. What's exciting is that, Joel and I correspond like everybody does in today's world, and we text and we leave each other these messages, and we've gotten in some very quantum frequencies together. And I'm like, gosh, we should do a podcast on this, right? So the seed topic for today is this concept of it's a bunch of things. It's time travel. It's like time, space, reality, consciousness. There's the quantum, it's all kind of fluid to me. And then I'm sure some things have a stronger pulse and a vibration, like just the word quantum has a slightly different vibration than like timeline jumping, right? But it's all part of the same consciousness and awareness that we carry. And
which is it's the base thing is it's just interconnectedness, really, right? It's understanding interconnectedness.
Yeah. So maybe I'll start by sharing a couple things. Let me just go back to this that we podcasted together a few years ago, and I think that was during the COVID years. And I think you were even in some roundtables with me with a few folks.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Right, we did that. And we just absolutely enjoy each other, and we live in this higher plane. And especially when we connect, it's like when you connect with somebody who will join you in this higher space, we can kind of bliss out in all the aspects of like consciousness where the spirit soul can go. So I found my way, certainly with the channeling that I do, or the receiving messages, or the frequency writing, whatever I want to call that, because it can go by many names.
Yeah, sure.
I have always been somebody that's very attracted to time travel. I mean, whether it was books I was reading, or I'd see hints of that in stories, or and I think that's essentially, for me, in a way, that's how I feel myself receiving messages that are beyond the typical, like the box that otherwise people can live in like a linear 3D type reality. And when I watch movies, or I read books, or I get into those characters of those stories who can live beyond what you see, what you can touch, right? Your five senses. We're talking about time travel. To me, is like accessing energy that's beyond the five senses. It's like a level beyond that.
For sure.
And so often that's my gateway. Like that's just the feeling of the frequencies inside me. I think my soul remembers time travel. I think that's what I do when I channel. I bring through messages. Anybody connecting with those higher aspects of themselves, I think, has some inkling of what I'm talking about. I think our listeners will resonate with some of what we're talking about. And for some people, if this is brand new to you, pull up a seat and get a beverage, and we're going to have some chats about all of these kinds of understandings and understandings and ways to play with this energy in our life. Because to me, when we play in more of these quantum realms and these higher frequencies, and we play with space and time, I don't, I left being a prisoner on this planet during that awakening process. Like, I don't feel limited by time and space. I can travel anywhere I want to just by focusing my attention, my, my consciousness there. So maybe I'll toss it back to you and say, why don't you share a little bit about when you started to play even with these concepts? Like, what led you to start playing in this arena?
Well, first, before I get going too much, when we talk about this stuff, I know some people, especially in spiritual groups, can feel like this stuff seems kind of cold and unemotional, but it's exactly the opposite, right? Where you're in these energies, where you're looking at it purely as energy or geometry and color or however you're perceiving it, it's like the most radically high volume on unconditional love that you can experience. And so I want people to understand that, because I think that there's, especially in the beginning of a spiritual journey, I think most of us we understand about that the I am is true, but we don't want to go there. People don't want to go to like nothingness. That doesn't sound interesting or good at all, but eventually that is where you're going to end up. So I just want people who understand when we talk about that part, that this is not, it doesn't lose its warmth and its depth when you go there. It's quite the opposite. It's like the other stuff gets so deep, it has so much depth and so much meaning that it's just, it just blows your mind basically. So anyways, I wanted to go with that.
No, it's a
But
great
I'm sorry.
invitation and
Yeah,
opening. Like, that's
yeah,
what we want people to
yeah,
feel when they're journeying with
yeah,
us today, is feel
yeah.
the expansiveness. It's not limiting and cold and like you said. Yeah, please.
And then also, I want everybody to understand that when you get into these types of discussions, they are quantum. And so, what we're doing, what you and I do when we discuss these things with people, is we're kind of building our own kind of in between language, basically. So you could say it's like but the base language is just this geometry and shape and energy, right? That's the base language, and that's oftentimes when the body, when you get into theta brainwave state, which is altered brainwave states, which is from a physical 3D standpoint, this is how you get there, right? But then once you're there, you realize, oh, I'm just watching all that. that's not that's not so. But you got to keep continuing to like sort of sometimes perceive choosing, but then when you go back there, you're like, there was never any choice. I'm just observation. There's nothing else
Wow.
happening, but it's the most amazing thing ever. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I know for a lot of people, some people get what you just described, and some people it still feels foreign, like, how do I get there? And what you're, at
Yeah.
different levels of consciousness, you start to realize you were there the whole time. You could never
Yeah.
not be there, right?
Yeah.
Which is
And that's
saying.
yeah. And that's when you understand, when you start understanding. I've had a ton of near death experiences, but I had one or two where I was like, oh, okay, I'm dead. And I just kind of let go. And I think that's, you tend to see that being a pattern in terms of people understanding this. For me, I didn't have the, hey, I died and I came back experience. But now I do feel like when you're in that theta brainwave state, or in the octave, or in, in this kind of 0 point state where you're still communicating, you're perceiving maybe what we would call heaven in a way. And I mean, I know hopefully that's not controversial. You're kind of perceiving this higher state because you're realizing what eternity means. And then you're also realizing that you're always already there. You're not, not there now. You
Right.
always are. And so once you can see that, and whenever in that state within your brainwave state, basically. So when you're not triggered and you're able to stay in the state of brainwave state, which just happens over time. I mean, it's actually not just state of brainwave state. It's a simultaneous brainwave state, because oftentimes when you're awake and you have theta brainwave state going, then you got a lot of gamma, because that's where the info is coming, right? And then delta brainwave state would be like, hey, you're at 0 point. You're just the observer. So all that stuff kind of it's multiple brainwave states happening at once. But it's just a natural progression, I think, that comes from somebody having an initial awakening, and then they do what they do spiritually over time, whether you call it spiritual practice or spiritual work. But again, once you actually realize, oh, I'm already awake, then you realize, oh, well, that's just stuff that was just part of the story that I'm watching. I wasn't actually doing any of it because I don't know how that makes sense. So
Right.
that do and be thing in the beginning is kind of a constant back and forth that can seem confusing and frustrating for sure. But eventually you get to a point where it's pretty easy going back and forth, and then even if you're very triggered, it doesn't last very long where you can hit back there. So I think
Right.
it's for the most part, awakening is a natural process that we're going through, just and the whole planet is going through it because the planet's just moving into a higher. I mean, from a three-dimensional standpoint, how do we understand things celestially? Just the planet, the energy in the planet's just going up. It's just that simple. And once the vibratory state of the planet is at a state which we might call the octave, then it just changes the whole ball game. Everybody's perception of reality will shift to quantum, maybe all at once at some point. I don't know. I don't.
It
That'll be
remains.
interesting. That's the interesting part of the story. It could be, but all at once across, when you zoom out, all at once could be like 100,000 years. It's like this, right? In terms of
Right.
so
Exactly.
I think a lot of what the planet's going on is going through right now is just this sort of angst about how we got to wrap this thing up before we blow ourselves up, right? But from when you zoom out and look at it, though, it's like, oh, that's just planets have rises and falls, and it's just I'm not that, I'm all of it, right?
Right.
So we can step out of those anxieties even about like, hey, what's going to happen? But
It's so
what do you
interesting.
think about that?
Well, when you were talking about that question of like what is going to happen, like how is this part of the movie going to play out? I immediately flashed to a movie. I can't remember all the details of it now, but there was a movie called The Race to Nowhere, really covering the educational system in our
Oh, I thought you were
country.
going to say NASA, but I thought
No,
you were going to say the moon. Yeah, yeah.
right. That can
Yeah.
mean many things. The Race to Nowhere,
Yeah,
and
exactly. It could be. It's kind of because I think it's part of the underlying structure.
right?
But
And yet,
yeah,
if you
yeah,
flip
yeah.
it, which is part of what the ascension is, it's like flipping everything from like the underbelly of
Uh,
creation to the true creation, then maybe the ascension process is the race to everywhere. Like that's what I felt. Like if people feel like, oh my gosh, what could happen? And are we going to annihilate ourselves? Like some people, the Armageddon type consciousness that some people hold, it's everything that you were describing is that when you are on your spiritual journey and you identify less and less with your physical self, we have to still take care of our vessel,
oh
but
yeah,
but
that's
when you
yeah,
identify less that it's all of you, that there's a whole other part of you that's actually animating the entire
yeah.
movie, and that's your like spirit soul, your soul presence, your higher self, your consciousness. There's so many names that it goes by, but I just love that feeling, the race to everywhere. Maybe it's not a race, but just like allowing in everything, and
Yeah.
we're in the
Well,
journey. Yeah.
there are several aspects to it. Of course, there's always many layers to what you say. So the way things work for me now, when I look at something, I look at it from multiple perception points, kind of everything that comes in my awareness. Not all the time, I'm not aware of it, but most of the time I'm aware of it. So you have sort of it's the Trinity, right? You have the perspective of from the I am consciousness where you're only the ops, and that's the when you return there, that's what just cleans everything else up and just allows everything to just be what it is and heal. So that's where you want to go. So if you want to get there ASAP, if you're in a hurry for your ascension, the best way to go is to figure out how to get there. And for most people, that's meditation, but not everybody. It happens, it could happen at any kind. Um, but so you have that I am perception, and then you have the perception from, well, I'm everything. I'm the whole, and that's a singular thing. Everything is a singular. So the this higher this fifth density consciousness, where you perceive the triple A, I'll say aliens, angels, and ascended masters, or whatever, however you want to classify this alt communication. That's a we. It's a singular we. And the more you are in that group, the more that you fully understand that we're all sharing this body that you are. We're all sharing all of it, but only within that level of consciousness. It's a shared thing. That's what an awakened avatar is, basically, is to understand that. And then just be able to go, oh, this body's doing what it does. And look at that. It's actually those thoughts and feelings of projecting unconditional love have now become what this body's actually acting out. So that's our journey here. That's our real journey here.
Wow.
So, and then the third perception is the I'm this individual, which we used to look at as separate, but we don't really, when you include these other two in your perspective point, then you don't need to look at it. And they're all occurring simultaneously. And it's interesting. I had this thought, I think it was yesterday. This is all day. This is a 24/7 thought process for me, this stuff. And I was realizing that it's almost like, well, I was realizing, it's just, this is information coming in, however you want to, whatever you call it. And I'm realizing that, or I'm seeing that, you can almost look at like the third dimension and the fourth dimension, or an integration of different dimensions as different time signatures. So like this one over here is playing it's playing a waltz, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and this one's going 1, 2, it's playing rock and roll, 3, 4. And you're learning how to be able to listen to both perfectly and enjoy them. But once you go quantum, it isn't just one other layer. It's all of it, right? And so that's the big jump. That's the jump. We're going from being able to perceive things only from here to kind of everything at once, where you actually get to perceive it as being that way, sort of. And really, when we have these connections, as you have more and more of these connections in this like theta realms, I've seen it called, I don't know, whatever you want to call that, where you're in the octave, where you're playing in this in between space, right? Literally, that's what it is. It's like space within space that can only be accessed in that vibration. So in a way, you could look at it as like a benevolent quarantine or something, because nothing else is getting in there. So if those are the places that you're playing, the only things that can come in have to be in that state too. So come on in. whatever yuckiness wants to come play up here, everybody's welcome. You're already here anyway. You're already here. Right. So come play. Come remember that they're already here. So when you understand that kind of stuff, I guess just you look at it from those three levels, and you're allowed to, then eventually you can kind of see those three levels all the time. And then, of course, one of those levels is the infinite. So that's where people get jammed up in the beginning, is because it's just like, wow, there's just so much to those ideas, those perceptions of downloading. Where really, I realize now, for me, that perspective is I perceive it that way a lot of times, but it's more like, now when I can see it, it's like more like the Akashic records, or the library, or whatever you want to call the memory complex that is access to everything. You just, as you go up, as you bump up, you just get a whole section of the library opens all at once. So you don't necessarily need to see it all. And maybe even you see it all at once for a second or something, but it's there later. You can go access it later. That when you get stuff, you don't have to stop what you're doing. I go, oh, this is an emergency. It feels like that in the beginning, because it's gamma energy. So it's creating a nervous system response that could be fight or flight, depending on how it arrives. And so you'll have this rushed feeling to it, like, oh, it's so important, because that's just what that vibration feels like all the time. But eventually you get more used to it, right? So that feeling of like, oh, everything's just so amazing, I gotta experience it all, right? Because that's what your nervous system's doing on your body. But the reality is, it's there now. You can go back anytime you want, within a perception.
Right there. It's right there. My experience, I mean, let me give people a lens on what you just shared too. Another way of seeing it is when I do a reading for somebody, if I've done a soul reading for somebody, I don't, as the channel, retain those details. That's something that like passes through me, paints onto the page, and then I share that with the person. And then I move on, and they might contact me 6 months later or 5 years later and say, I pulled out my reading from 5 years ago. And they'll just making connection with me again, mentioning one thing about the reading. I'm right there. Like I could just, that energy, if it's still a living energy, and if it's still true for them or whatever it is, it's right there. And so in the record of everything, in the record of the whole creation, we don't have to have these fabulous memories, right? Because the energy continues on. So you could pick up where you left off, if you choose to. And some people have evolved past.
Sort of, kind of.
Because then some people, 5 years later, 5 years have passed, they have changed. but there's
Yeah.
elements of truth of what that was in their whole history that is still
Yeah.
accessible. And as they've changed, it also creates a bigger picture and multi-layered picture of that person. So what
For
I
sure.
guess the way I bring that up right now is that it's not lost. Like, that's why maybe I'm bringing up The Race to Nowhere, which was that movie about school and kids and having to like sit in desks and take these tests and all that stuff. That's the modeling we've all had at least the last hundred and
Yeah.
whatever, 100 some years. But before
Yeah.
that, people were learning in lots of different ways, you know, and having apprenticeships and learning on the job and all those things. And I just feel the truth of that is that we don't need things drilled into ourselves. Like, no one's really talking, and I don't want to digress because it's a whole other podcast, but just about the expansiveness of the soul, how our educational system is so archaic. It was archaic to us from the beginning, before it even began to put kids in desks and test them and have the bell curves and all that stuff. Um, that that was already so devolved from who we really are. But we all had the experience in the movie. And I guess what I'm saying is, when you access the quantum, you have access to infinite knowledge, you have access to infinite possibility, you have access to an infinite amount of timelines and experiences
Yeah.
that your soul can have. And that's not something that you're going to just find in a test. You know, I think we already know everything that we could need to know. And depending on a soul's journey through time, in this matrix anyway, there has been this kind of spiritual amnesia or forgetfulness. So it seems like we have to relearn all this stuff, but all of this stuff is right here inside you the whole time. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah. That's good. Oh, fantastic. Yeah, I really like the ancient history shows, the ancient civilization shows, where they're starting to piece together this narrative based on, Sumerian text. And it goes back. It's really, it looks. I've been following this one guy. I think it's Wallace is his name, Mike Wallace. I think he's in the church for a zillion years. He's from Great Britain and now he's in Australia. But he's starting to dissect some of the Old Testament stuff as being just stories of this ancient and aliens basically that landed and created us and all that, and it's like in these Sumerian texts, and it's all there and like kind of plain, like if you just read it, it's like, well, I don't think they can really mean much else than that. But but anyway, so I love those. So all of this stuff that you're seeing though is this ancient wisdom that's popping up all over, that you see all these symbols and all that. Like, all you got to do is meditate. You're going to see those things in your own head. That symbology, those, so because it's just basic, it's a geometric shape. So, like you said, when you can access intelligent infinity, you kind of have the answers to those ancient mystery school teachings.
Yeah.
They're on the walls of those places or in lost texts or whatever. It's so if and I think that's what those mystery teachings are for, is to help people who don't have access to it to get them access. And most of that's through physical stuff. It's through taking care of yourself, basically. It's at a high level. So if you look at any of these ancient teachings, most of it, at least especially the East, right, Eastern part of the world, there's a physical element to it. It's yoga or qigong or whatever, and then there's meditation. So that's not the requirement, because especially now with the energies coming out, people are just going bing, like just stuff's just happening. Some people are just waking up, and a lot of people probably don't need that. But for a lot of people, it's part of the practice as they're awakening, and it's definitely helpful. What I want to say about the education thing, yeah. So when you have access to that, I was just going to say, if you have access to it, you are already kind of there, right? So as far as learning and teaching, though, the way things are going now, the way things have been, it's just a matter of what energy we've been in, basically, and that's where the forgetting comes from too. So think about anytime you ever get anxious, you or anyone, it's anxious or where your nervous system's going, you actually are convinced, no matter how awake you are now, that this is just how things are now. It's going to be like that forever. Even though, right, there's this unconscious feeling of that, because you just lose this, you just temporarily lose perception of the connection. You never lose the connection. So that's the really interesting part, is you really don't. You just can't see it because the veil is kind of going like this. And the veil is just the energetic level. So when we get into the octave or this other theta realm or whatever we want to call that connection, you now remember. So when you come back down, you don't think about this communication or this idea you had or what you wrote down that was so profound, 5 years ago, maybe even like 2 days ago for me sometimes. But then when you're back in it, it'll all come back and you'll remember. You won't have to see every detail, but you'll know every single detail is there. And so let's just say, hypothetically speaking, to make it more easy to follow, that you have a perception of an interaction with a person. I'm just trying to make it simple, or a being, whatever. Um, you don't remember their name. You don't think about them at all, and then all of a sudden they come back, and you know them like they're you, because that's what that connection is. And so the same thing happens with our memory. Here is where we lose our memory, right? Because we can only see sort of one lifetime at a time, which is an illusion of what's really happened. So that's not,
Right.
an illusion that's created by the physical senses of a physical body that some people would say are incarnated into. I don't look at it that way because that's more, it's kind of sort of less of a well, at least in terms of like incarnations from the past, I just look at those as like the first one you're remembering from all the ones, because you're all of them. Does that make sense? They're all
Yeah.
happening at one time. So when we remember at one time, that's just part of the energy that you're in, where that's just the way it's being presented to you from this perspective point. But it's not the kind of higher, I don't want to say higher truth, but not kind of the higher vibrational perspective point. By higher perspective points, when I say that, I never mean like superior, because that's not how it's seen from those levels.
No.
Definitely, that level is not superior to anything. It's just another level where things are awesome. Basically, where things are really, really awesome,
Right.
and
Right.
you can see all and you can see all levels from there, and that's where you return to every time. You just keep returning and returning there. Whether you look at it from lifetimes or even once you're awakening in your awakening process, day to day, week to week, hour to hour, you're in this kind of circle, because that's where we kind of sort of illusory in illusory way perceive ourselves to be, as in the rotation of I don't know, you could say the toroidal field, or maybe you could just say, in the vortex, that you perceive yourself going like this, even though you're not. You're the center of it that's observing the whole thing. So when you tap back into that, now you remember.
Right. Right. It it is so powerful, which is where the conscious breathing comes in that I talk about so much on all of my videos and
Yeah.
all of the messages, because that's where you can be number one in that conscious breath. You can be everywhere all at once, in your perceiving, in your presence, in your observation. And another friend of mine, I can't remember exactly how she says it, but if people are feeling stressed, if they're listening to a podcast, like, I can't perceive like that, all I can see is what's right in front of my face, like I can't even imagine seeing having that kind of awareness. And what I know is, when people are most stressed, it's because they are in some myopic type focal point. They can't see the forest through the trees. And when I take a conscious breath, I'm already allowing the picture to get bigger. I'm already allowing in the feeling of the observer. I'm allowing in the feeling of that, like, divine presence, if you will. And
Yeah.
there's something that happens that when I breathe, to me, conscious breathing is, I can step out of linear time, and linear time is where the stress is. When you are the
Yeah.
soul witnessing the experience that your human self is having, your soul is fine and perfect and eternal and fabulous, and can be traveling like an oversoul even in many dimensions at the same time. But
Yeah.
it's good to remind our human selves that if something is in our life that's really challenging and or frustrating or difficult in some way, if we would just simply breathe, and if you do it consciously, that's allowing your human self to connect with your higher self, to say, can I breathe beyond this box, please? Just a little bit beyond what I'm experiencing that feels so overwhelming right now. And to me, that's like my ticket to the infinite, my ticket to the cosmos, my ticket to time traveling or transcending even the experience that I have. And and I know I can speak for myself, Joel, that just because I'm awake doesn't mean that it's a challengeless life, right? If we're in this world, even if we're not fully of it, we all face challenges. And in the last 6 to 12 months, especially, I felt myself doing what we're talking about in this like energy of the infinite quantum reality, higher consciousness, timeline jumping type stuff, quantum space awareness, or space time awareness. You give such good language to it because that's part of what we're becoming more comfortable with, is being a spirit, soul, human, allowing ourselves that fluidity. And I think what I'm ultimately talking about is that we have challenges, and we still have challenges even if we're awake. And what I've allowed myself to put into practice is to see like the human still in kind of a 3D matrix like way, having an experience, having a challenge, but immediately going into this space where I take a breath for that challenge. It's that 1, 2, 3 quantum creation that I talk about a good bit. And I take a breath. The first breath isn't to jump out of that feeling, it's to take a breath for what I am feeling. It's take a breath for the discomfort that my human self, in a very physical way, whether it's anxiety, I let myself have that. But what I really have been putting into practice is that second breath and third breath, where I allow myself to take the next breath and I'm willing to go to neutrality. I'm willing to go into that space of, I don't know. I just don't know. And when I go into that sacred neutrality, kind of in my heart space, I'm making room for whatever the solution is, whatever the unfoldments, whatever the knowledge or wisdom I need to have. It can find me. I'm in this space of receptivity and I'm okay, right? I'm hovering beyond whatever the situation is. And then I take another breath. We call this time traveling. And in seconds now, because I put it into practice, I can have a breath for the frustration or challenge. I can have a breath for the sacred neutrality. And I'm suspended in this beautiful space of grace where I don't need to know how that's going to get resolved. I'm just in this suspended space, fully connecting to source, which is where all the answers, all the remedies or whatever, the relief that I'm looking for is. And then when I get really fortified and I get replenished or nourished by that energy, I take another breath and kind of stand next to source and like, what do we want to create in the next breath about that situation, or just in general? Do I want to just create in a different direction? And maybe that doesn't even need to be addressed. Maybe it's just going to float on by if I don't give all my attention to it. So this is a form of how I travel through time, but it could just be in a conversation with somebody who doesn't even know that I'm doing that, but I could be doing that.
I do it while I'm teaching class sometimes.
Do you?
I'll be doing a lot. I mean, definitely while I'm driving my car. Anytime I'm doing anything where it's like it's part of like a normal alpha brainwave state, to be able to do it where it seems almost automated normally. So anything where I'm just not familiar with it, I will, yeah, that's where I am. I mean, always, yeah. But the interesting thing, what you just said, it's interesting because obviously I saw a lot of stuff there.
Yeah,
So
please.
the beginning of it was, I don't know if you remember, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, or it's always progressing. You know, we're receiving this understanding. We need to breathe. But we still weren't really doing it. It's like, I know I should be, but you know what I mean? But now it's happened. And that's part of the automated process. It seems like it's like, oh, we just finally got around to it, but that's just not really what's happening. That's a three-dimensional or third density ego perspective of it. So what happens though when you develop a system like you have there, and I have a bunch of my own, but usually I don't even need to do that most of the time. But but I really just I got to a point where I just enjoy it because it feels it's blissful now. It is when you do it enough, it just feels amazing. So um, but what happens when you develop that? What you're doing from a three-dimensional standpoint within the body is you're developing muscle. Basically, your body knows that, okay, when I do this, my body soothes itself, and then I just go right into theta realm, and also parasympathetic nervous system response. So you don't have any of the epinephrine and the fight or flight stuff going. So that's what happens. You're just conditioning yourself to be, basically it's an evolution of the nervous system. You've just realized hey, guess what? I can condition myself instead of having conditioning or like fight or flight response. I can create conditioning for the opposite, the complete relaxation. And so if you do that, so that's what's happening with your breathing, why you can do it so easily now. It's because you've just done it enough to where your body goes, your body and your brain go, oh, this is the switch that does that. And so you can eventually make that switch just literally be like a switch, if you do it enough. And for me, now I still have situations where there's just all kinds of stuff just goes. So when you're very first, having this intuition experience, you see things, right? You see things, you see meaning in things, and you see things that remind you that, oh, unconditional love, the I am. Once you get into that, you see things. Well, eventually, just everything does that. Even the bad stuff, even the stuff that you think of as bad, eventually it'll be, yeah, you'll have a physical reaction. But in that one or two breath, you'll be like, okay, well, it's just it just was an accident or whatever, whatever's happened. Or, oh gosh, yeah, I better run because it's a bear. That's interesting. So I had this, I think it was yesterday. I stopped to do a little bit on my way to class, usually to teach. I will stop and put my feet in the grass. I like the grounding. And I'll do
That's
some sort of
right.
meditation.
Oh yeah.
And I was just having this, I just really got myself in this amazing theta brainwave state where I was just listen out, like, as much as one could. And all of a sudden I came right back and my foot was hurting. I stepped on, I thought, a thorn. So I've got this immediate fight or flight response, right? Because I'm like, ow, it really hurts. And so, which I don't really see pain exactly the same, anyways, either in those states anymore. But so I'm like, oh no, respond, right? So I go to grab it, and it's a bee. It's a bee that's stinging. And so I go, oh, this hurts so bad. My body's going like, I gotta just grab this bee. But I'm like, no, there's no reason to do that. The bee's gonna die. So I just gently took this little bee, and I was like, okay, I'm sorry, buddy. I don't know, you're not going to make it. But so I just didn't have, I had that initial response, but all it took was a breath or two breaths, even though it was still really, I forgot how much a bee sting hurt because of the
Right.
envenomation part. Like it really hurt. But I was able to. So it is possible. I think for the most of us on the planet, we'll never get past the whole part about when your life's in peril that you don't kick back into that because that's part of that's the program that got us here, right? So
Well,
if
it's
that makes
so
sense.
interesting that you bring up this bee example. I was on another call with a friend of mine named Suzette Faith Foster. I've also podcasted with her. People can go into the channel and find that deep in the archives. But she is somebody who had a Christopher Reeve type accident. And so she was mountain biking, but she flipped over the handlebars of her bike at a considerable speed and she snapped her vertebrae and she wasn't breathing on the scene. And this is like an extreme form of what you just described with the bee or anything
Yeah.
else anybody else can think of in their life that there's some trigger and there's this whole, I guess, all of those emotions and all of that energy wants to rush towards it and react. But she just basically said something like, and we talked about it this morning, we haven't talked about it in a long time, but we revisited that and she said, yes, like I basically do not consent, this is not my reality and God is my source. And she repeated that while she was not breathing, on the
Wow.
scene. She said, this
Yeah.
is not my reality and God is my source. And she said on the second time she felt a strike of lightning go through her body, she felt it. And then
Wow.
she said it inside her mind because she couldn't move or speak or breathe. She said it again, and on the third time, a whole like electrical current shot through her body. This is a true story. And
I believe it. Yeah.
her arm moved, like it twitched. And then right after that, she got her breath. And then there was a whole
Amazing.
journey with that. And of course, the EMT, the people arrive on the scene and are in awe that she made it through, that she's even breathing at that point. And she had a series of those experiences through that journey. They got her to the hospital and the surgeon on call, and they were telling her the forecast that they're going to operate, but she might be a quadriplegic and she just needed to prepare for that mentally. And with breath and speech at that point, because she had it all back, she told them, I'm going to walk out of here. I'm walking out of here. Within 18 hours, she was walking the halls of the hospital. She's got an incredible story. She wrote a book. She mentioned it to me again this morning. It's called Calling Back Your Power. is Suzette Faith Foster's book. You can get it on Amazon. So interesting that that's coming in. But the point is, in that moment, just like you had the bee, she wasn't breathing, and had to, obviously, in those seconds going on there, have an up, she could have panicked, you could have done a million different things, but she went immediately into her faith, into calling out what was going to be her reality, and that she rejected that the option in front of her of not breathing was not an option, right? And God was her power. And so she quickly quantum jumped at some level into an energy inside herself, or a consciousness, or a timeline where she was still breathing. I mean, that's a concept that, we kind of visited a little bit this morning. Was that a timeline jump? Did she timeline jump into a timeline where she was breathing and step out of the consciousness where she wasn't breathing, right?
Great segue, because that is something you could play with. I mean, I mean, if you understand the concept of the infinite alternate realities, which quantum physics has proven mathematically, but there's still people going, I don't know if I can go that far with it, because I just can't. But they all agree that the math is there, right? And so this also, so you're, anytime that you're thinking, that you perceive thinking about the past or the future, that's what kind of, you could almost look at it as that way. You're actually accessing an alternate future. That's what the imagination is, most of it. That's what when we're having imagination, meaning something that's not real, it's still real. So within consciousness, and of course your experience right now is still. So we really are in an amazing paradigm within our collective consciousness right now, where we really are redefining what real means. And you have to actually let go of that in order to go through the awakening process. You have to, because what you think is real is based on the five senses. Turns out they're incorrect. Mostly, well, they're limited. They're very limited, right? So you're seeing one little sliver of an infinite thing, because it's all happening simultaneously. So, and so anytime you're in perception of the movement, though, of this process, you're within the illusion. You're within the because the time space, we'll call it illusion. You call it illusion, or you could call it reality, or you could call it the matrix, or the quantum field. All that stuff's the same thing, right? The veil, it's all the same thing. So just different ways of calling it.
These are examples of, anytime, I love what you said, that when people are in the past and the future, they don't think about that as time traveling. They don't think about that as being quantum or multidimensional.
Oh,
the only way that we can do that is if we're accessing these other states of consciousness, which means part of you is also somewhere else. But they're
so that's so that's where I want to go with it. So anytime you're perceiving movement, change, something arriving instead of already there, you're within the illusion that is also time space. Movement is the same. It's their alignments. They're not like separate parts. So because everything is actually occurring simultaneously. You can't really even say even as a single instant, because there's no beginning or end. So there's not really like, oh, this thing happened, boom, and now it's all over. It doesn't, that's a three-dimensional perspective of time space. And it's not just three-dimensional, it's all those other dimensions too. And then sort of even beyond that, because once you get into theta, you start the pretty much all concepts from an individual standpoint, not from a macro standpoint, from a zoomed in standpoint, you sort of have to let go of categorizations and labels like 3D and 4D and all that, because you don't have those barriers anymore. So think about it if you're say ninth dimensional, we'll say, and and you have access to all the dimensions below it. It would be like you live in a house with walls, but to you the walls aren't there. So would you think you lived in a house with walls? Would that be your perspective? No, it wouldn't. You just have access to whatever comes up. Well, that's the same thing for humans. When you go up here in the pineal gland and you have this, you're in theta realm and you're in that space, there's no rhyme necessarily. It's not a three-dimensional perception most of the time, at least not for me. It's not like this storyline arrives and there's this beginning and the end, and you have this conversation where we began, and it's all over the place. And then those pieces just come together to form this incredible larger picture, right? But while you're experiencing all the small stuff. But that again, that's still within an illusion where we play. So that's
Yeah.
the next place we're headed. This area, higher area of, we'll call it the image. I love that because it's kind of the design of it. You really can look at it visually from a perspective point of refracted light.
Hmm.
Like you're looking at a kaleidoscope. These lights are bouncing off all each other, and if you get far enough in there, it looks like all of this. That's what it is. So if you get zoomed in enough, it's just those fractalized light forming this weird stuff that seems like normal to us, but it's just the shape. It's just part of the repetition of the same finite shapes over and over and over within an infinite ability to experience all those versions. Does that make sense?
Right. No, it totally makes sense. And I love what we're talking about because, again, people can zoom in and they can zoom out. People forget that they can zoom out, right? That's part of that fluidity. That's part of that consciousness breathing. That's part of that
Yeah.
shifting your timelines or moving through time and space. And it's just when you get way up too close and this is all you can see, it gets
Yeah.
the inflexibility, the rigidity sets in, and
Yeah.
people feel like they're locked in, locked down, and they can't get out. There's no other option other than X or Y or Z. And it's a really good
And
reminder, like we're talking about some of this we can apply deep into the 3D land of life. And these are just terms that a lot of people watching a video like this would understand 3D, 4D, and 5D, but
yeah,
they're fluid
sure.
consciousnesses. Once you
Yeah.
understand that, you could just move in between them. What's
Well,
really
once you break the three-dimensional barrier, basically, just within your perception of what it all is, then it's less limited. Then it's not like, and you don't have to necessarily look at it as like, oh, I'm in this dimension now. Now I'm over in this dimension. It's not really
right.
like that.
It's not really like
So yeah,
that.
no, at
No,
least not for me. At least that's not my perspective.
that's the beauty of it. Once you practice it enough, it is so fluid. That's where you can be anywhere. There's that movie Everywhere, Everything Everywhere All at Once.
Yeah, that's good.
I want to see that a second time because I've heard you pick up a lot more when you watch it again.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. But we can kind of be everywhere, anytime all at once or everything everywhere
Well, you
all.
always are. You always are. So anytime you just tune into understanding that is actually true, then you can experience it to some extent. You can experience
Right.
it, or you can go to silence and be like, nothing's happening at all, but I understand them every once. It's just sort of over there or something. Like
Right.
it's not within my
You can
perception
get in
right
that
now, but
gentle
it's still I
space.
know it, but I know it's still there. All of it's still there. I had one of my first kind
Yeah.
of big awakenings. I had this vision where I was basically like one with source as the sun. Like there was all this light. At that time I had this perception that there was this little pipeline down way far below me. That this is just in a meditation, just meditating at the beach, and that everything was in that pipe, and that I could access anything in that little pipeline. But from where I was, it was seemed so far away. But I could still at any moment go, oh, I can access any of it from here, way up here. So it was before I had any of this quantum understanding. It was just the way my brain was processing a
Right.
way to show it to me. But that's still that perception has grown and grown and grown and grown. And then also the other perception that grows and grows and grows, at least at times we tune into it, is the silence. It's like the silence is sort of eclipsing everything
Mm.
else, and yet it's
Wow.
still there and more visible. But it's like the silence is rising within relative volume of the noise, I guess. I don't know if that makes sense. And then and I kind of understand that that's the forever. When you're in it as a journey that is forever, as an immortal soul, that you are always that just keeps growing and growing forever because it's a fractal, right? Because it's all relative. It's all within the illusion of relativity.
Right. Right. But what I love about what we're talking about is I'm going to go back to the fluidity, the flow, and that awareness that if we're too close in, we just need to take a few breaths, go into your heart space, go in that meditative space, be the observer, and you can zoom out at whatever level's comfortable for you to a bigger picture view on the same thing. And how many people do that? I mean, how many people have this awareness? I think it's increasing because I think so
Yeah,
much
I think
is
it's millions now. I think it's millions on the planet now. It's a lot. I mean, it's so much that I think that if it, and it's, of course, it's always growing exponentially. It's just part of the, the transition between third dimension and limitlessness is a sudden, like, exponential growth, because you're
yeah.
accessing just vortex math. Basically, it's a doubling of a doubling of a doubling. You're just seeing through the
Right.
illusion of what I call 4D, but really space time, whatever you want to call space time, elude that, the construct of that, whatever you want to call that. Um,
Mm.
that that once you breach that, then you start seeing things are snowballing. Things are really, we're not moving linearly. We're moving like it's like that, right? And so, like, remember the snowball? I don't know if you remember the snowball. Your
Yes,
mic. I was
yes.
telling you about a snowball. You're like, oh, my mic. That's my microphone's a snowball. It's like, oh, probably a coincidence.
Right.
But which I don't believe in those, and I don't believe so
No,
anymore.
no.
Um, yeah. So anyway, so as we but that's a transitional state, right? Because that's just that's just what the game's doing. That's just what the video game is doing. It's just like, hey, I used to have these perceptions that went over here and over here and over here, and now I'm starting to see that everything's just like boom, and it can be really overwhelming too, right? When you perceive that from a third density or third dimensional perspective, it can be like, oh no, there's just too much happening. I can't take it all. Your nervous system doesn't like it. But when you're in that quantum thing, it's blissful, right? It's the thing that's creating
It's natural as breathing. It's such a
yeah,
natural part of ourselves. It's almost like, which we've known for a long time, it's like we are practicing the art of allowing. We're allowing in what
yeah,
the moreness that we have the capacity to perceive, right? We're
yeah.
just allowing it in, and
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 that's the upside down view, bro, right? That's the bottom part looking up. The top part
right,
looking down, which when you're up there, there's no down. You're not looking down on anything, right? It's just all there. So
right,
that's another interesting thing. Once you breach the perception, the as above, so below, as within, so without, and realize, no, you're the center, the
yeah,
middle of that. That once you're in the center, you can see that, no, I just have access to all of it, and so there's no wall, there's no below, there's no to the side. It's an open room, right?
right, right.
That makes
It's
sense.
it's
Um,
it's so
yeah,
good. It's so good to be having conversations like these in these times. Plenty of
yeah,
people will listen to this and find this video and be like, "Oh, I'm so there. I so get it. I like to play in the quantum field, and I do every day, right?" And some people are going to listen to this and say, "I want to play.
yeah,
I don't. I hear what you're saying. I don't quite have the experience that we obviously look on camera to be having,
yeah,
but."
yeah,
It is just starting with something as simple as whatever's going to help you relax and open to the space inside you where you can allow in a little bit more of who you are. And to me, that's the beginning of the time traveling, the space time relativity, or whatever you want to call that, the quantum field. Um, but that's where we get to play. And when we can enter that space, we can amazingly impact. I've actually used the quantum field to go back to earlier versions of me this lifetime and other lifetimes and been the mentor who appeared before the me in this other version that's in some kind of trauma and has summoned in, like, called in help, called the source. And I was some of the source. Like, we can be the
yeah,
source for
yeah.
ourselves because we
Well,
are source
well,
energy.
that's what this sort of an awakening slash angel training, guide training. So you're guiding. It can not just be yourself. You can guide anybody anytime. You can tap in and guide anybody. And if it's somebody who's in your three-dimensional world now, they may not perceive it, but you're not connected to the third density them. You're connected to the one that's already there. So you're kind of connected to their higher self, basically.
Right.
So your higher self's connecting with their higher self, and that's where all the really quantum, healing happens. That's that where, and again, that quantum healing is sort of exponential compared to what we're doing in real life. Even though what we're doing in real life has the same spreading out exponential effect, right? Because you affect this person and then these people and those people, and so that's something that's becomes more obvious to you too. The more that you're genuinely want to have this benevolent unconditional love for people and have them be able to experience that next level, and that's like
Yeah.
your goal, your intent, then it's powerful. It's really powerful. It's really what the key to this whole concept of heaven returning to earth is. Just if everyone's like that, then there's no problems, at least not with humans, right?
Right.
So if everybody's intent is to just be like, even if you're still focused on, you still have to focus on yourself. Those two things are kind of like your ability to love outside of yourself is always aligned with your ability to love the self, right? Those two
Right.
things are unaligned, a deadlock alignment always. They're one thing, because there is no other self, and there's not even a self. There's only the I am observing those. So when you
Right.
step into that, though, that's ironically the entropy, the absence of anything, the silence, the stillness, the 0 point. That's what creates the infinite energy. I mean, that's why everybody's, like, we got to get this 0 point energy. It's because you're tapping into to consciousness or the matrix or whatever you call it, which is energy. And earlier you were talking about space and time travel, but if you look at any time, like I said, you perceive anything as changing, that is time travel, and it's an illusion, because you're not really moving through time and space. You're stationary. I don't mean you, the body. So if you ever look at, like, watch a video game or TV, basically, you're looking at a three-dimensional thing that seems, or a two-dimensional plane that looks three-dimensional, because that's how your brain processes. It's kind of what higher reality is too. I mean, the
Wow.
three-dimensional, time and distance is just based on the Fibonacci sequence
Right.
as it strings out, which is the structure, which is just the numeric structure of the fractal that we perceive from the third dimension. But we're really not perceiving three-dimensional space. It just seems that way because your brain is wired that way. I saw something recently where they said that they're able to now to look at sections of the brain that are creating geometry as the neurons are firing simultaneously. It's creating all those geometric shapes that we see, that are the only ones that exist, right? It's just a finite number of these shapes. And so it's actually the shape of the shape. If you were to just look at a crosscut of your neurons firing, they would be aligned like that, just creating the shapes that create our reality. So really, the body is pretty much an infinitely layered filter over a lens, or an
Mm.
infinitely layered, like,
Wow.
light over a lens, that when you look through that lens, and this is not literal, of course, this is an analogy, because all that part's part of the illusion too. But you got to get there. Right? You're talking about it, you have to lose things, right? That's the difficulty with languaging and stuff.
Yeah.
But if you're, yeah, but so really, what creates your reality, it's VR, basically. I mean, it's not literally VR. We're not. I don't think we're literally inside some person's program, but that could be a level of reality that could be created, right, with the AI and all that. So, but it's not that there's a program. It's that the universe has a program, and those programs have to be the reason they work is because they're aligned to the program of the universe. I don't know if that makes
Mm.
sense.
That's right. No.
Yeah,
Like there's like alignment. I mean, I think so. We're talking about alignment
yeah,
and harmony, and I think that's the sense that people like you and I and many of our listeners will have, is this. A lot of people do have this awareness that we're moving into something extraordinarily beautiful and wonderful and great and expanding and all these wonderful things. And we also know that there's growing pains and all of those things that we're still growing through. We've been talking about it for a number of years. I'm sure we were talking about it 3 years ago in our last podcast, and we're talking about it again today. And yet, where you put your attention is a choice, where we focus our consciousness is a choice. And so maybe it's a good moment to segue for the last part of our podcast today. Is both of us, we had an exchange sometime recently where I was sharing, like, oh, I love all these time travel shows and quantum, like, what are you watching basically on Netflix and some of these places, and what are you watching? So we shared some films that we like or series that we like, because it brings some of these concepts to life. And before I share a couple, or ask you to share and I share some of what's really touched me and moved me recently in terms of the way some of these concepts can be depicted, is that it seems in the 3D matrix to make things more appealing to the masses so that everybody can access the messages in there. I'm going to call
Yeah.
it multidimensional manuscripts because I think, or
Yeah.
you know, the
Yeah. I know what you're
screenwriting.
saying. Yeah.
Yeah, the screenwriting. I think there's something for everyone. If we actually start to pay attention to the shows being made in the last like 4 or 5 years, I'm saying
Yeah.
I think there's an abundance of shows that we didn't see this with like time travel as a theme or the quantum field or superpowers or accessing other versions of ourselves somewhere else to help us in this timeline. That theme is definitely more prevalent than ever before. And I find that fascinating. And then also to make note, just to say that I think in that mass appeal, in this multidimensional screenwriting, there's something for everyone type thing. There's definitely violence. There's definitely some bad guys chasing some good guys a lot of the time, right? But if you, depending on your level of consciousness, you may pick up deeper messages. You may pick up deeper themes. You might even feel like the quantum field is communicating with you some an answer to a prayer or something that you were tuning into, but you didn't have the language. And I feel that a lot now. Like I'll see a movie, not always, but I'll see
Yeah.
a series or something. I'll be like, oh my God, they depicted that in that one scene better than I've seen anybody else depict that aspect of consciousness anywhere else. And so I'm extracting some kind of quantum messages as best I
Yeah.
can. And we all see the violence or the tension, the intensity, and that can make movies good too. But everybody has their own threshold for that. And some people who are allowing themselves to become more and more sensitive and more aware and all of their senses awake and alive. I definitely had a big period of my life where I was too sensitive to watch or read or about
Oh
many
yeah.
things. And I still have things that are
Anything.
off.
Yeah. Anything. Yeah.
Yeah, some things are still off limits for me. Like I cannot have like gratuitous violence and craziness and or twisted,
Yeah.
psychopathic behavior. But but I also can watch some shows where there's elements of that. But if the stronger pulse of energy is on the quantum freedom or the superpower that's inside all of us, right? And that hero's journey kind of awakening story, I can I actually don't focus as much and I'm not as disturbed by some of the more violent aspects if I a bigger part of me is really gleaning some of these quantum frequencies. And so anyway, I
Yeah.
just wanted to plant those seeds that
Yeah.
a lot of people are just viewers of content, or readers of content. We ingest so much content every day with the internet and our phones and everything else. But if you become a conscious breather who's consciously choosing to watch shows and you're asking the universe to, or God, spirit, whatever your guides, your counsel, whatever you want to call that, to bring to you some shows that can empower the higher frequencies that you are to keep growing forth, to be more of who you are in the physical, but bringing all of those like superhero skills or whatever you want to call it, quantum perception with you. I am finding it very helpful. And I'm so grateful that some filmmakers are starting to put this into their movie making. So,
Yeah. There's no doubt that there are some writers who are enlightened, have at least significant understanding of enlightenment. And I think there's a lot of people in Hollywood that have that are being guided from their perception.
yes.
That's but not all of I think, but it's interesting you said the TV thing. So this is kind of where I think a lot of it very first started popping up for me, but it's been years now where anything I watch on TV is like that. It doesn't matter what it is. I'm just like, oh, that's because I can see it now in the even the darkness. Even if something we consider dark, those are just distorted. It's just the same light and geometry, but just distorted. And
Right.
really, it's and that's it. I don't know if you ever heard the concept that suffering is an illusion, that all that part's an illusion. Kind of the whole thing is an illusion, but it is sort of a mirrored reflection of higher reality
Yeah.
that's distorted. And the reason it's distorted is because of our perception point within it. There's a little more to that. Like we can get into later, maybe talk about the 7 notes in the scale, because that's always fun. And but what I was going to say is that's you can look at anything that way, but definitely when you start off on watching stuff that's literally about those subjects, that's what usually hooks you. And there's a reason when people watch those, they're drawn to it. It's because they're perceiving, a higher perception of reality unconsciously within it, and they're drawn to it because it's giving them information. It's basically intelligent infinity being acted out in a three-dimensional way, which is kind of how everything is real.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think people who are drawn to that, there's a reason. I always have been too. I've always loved time travel stuff. I've always loved sci-fi and travel.
Right.
Yeah, always. And then once the ancient alien stuff came out, I wasn't a big necessarily believer in aliens, but I just couldn't stop watching it. I had to watch all of those.
Wow.
And then now it's, but I didn't know why at the time. I was just like, I can't stop watching this. And the whole time I'm going, is it real? Is it not real? It's real. Like now I'm just like that for me, I'm kind of getting to the point now where it's like the understanding of like trying to convince somebody else that whether something's real or not doesn't, it's a complete waste of energy because it's all based on relative perception.
Yes.
And as an individual, we all have much more radically different perceptions of reality than people understand. Much more radically different as an individual. And so of course, you're not the individual, but from that perspective point, what we have developed is this sort of, collective ego that is about categorization, right and wrong, black and white, bad and good, right? It's all the way or no way. There's no, you're not accessing the space in between yet, right? So it's all over here or all over here, and so that creates this, opposition that's often based upon this concept. If you ever hear yourself going, I need to be right about this, and especially if it's like, I need somebody else to be wrong, that's kind of a big part of what our ego consciousness is stuck in right now. Is people, they don't just want to be right about something. They need to convince everybody else that that's the right. That's what the ego does. It's trying to without realizing it, it's trying to suck everybody else into its reality, right? That's the biggest level of narcissism, is just to go, everybody's gonna do whatever I want them to do, right? And that's reality. So that's really, let's face it, that's who's been running this planet for a really long time.
Yes.
And so, but that's going away. I don't know how that's all going to work out, but it's not going to be like this.
I think it's souls like us that are waking up to the movie that it is and realizing how great what's real is, and that we can tap into that anytime we want, even if there are parts of the movie that are incredibly painful, whether it's literally a movie series that I'm watching or a show series, or it's something in the real world that's playing out with, forest fires or whatever it might be, right? But when you realize that even in the illusion, if you can know it's an illusion, even though it's horrible, just like a movie, you're watching a bad scene, something that makes you very uncomfortable, and it's a movie. It's a similar perspective shift. And then I put my energy on the really fabulous things that some of these filmmakers are talking about. And when I'm quantum accelerating or amplifying what they showed me that's great, then I think we're part of the change that we want to see. The same is true about the people who've been running the planet, whatever you want to call those beings. They wanted us in films to put our attention on the scary things and not ever see the good stuff. Do you know what I'm saying? So we are projecting and amplifying that. We are projectors.
Yeah.
We are projectors.
The problem for them, us, it's still us too, right? That's the part. So that's the difficulty of. So that's really where the big crossover, I think, from the what I've heard people call the self no self barrier is, to understand that you're the I am, basically, concept is this understanding that this, what's happening is not real, but you still can't push it away. You have to accept it. You have to allow it to be. And then once you do that, now you are the allowing to be, and you're now connected back to source. Does that make sense to you? So because that's what source is, that's what the vibration of source is stillness, right? And the way that we get to the space in between is to connect to the stillness. It's almost like a portal. But really what it is in terms of well, not really what it is in your body. It's not really what it is, but from a perspective of, I got to stop saying that. It's old habits. From a perception of your body, what you're doing is you're stimulating your vagus nerve. Your vagus nerve runs down there's parts of it throughout your whole body, but most of it's the way to get to it directly is up in your neck area. Um,
Interesting.
But conscious breathing. So when you do conscious breathing, it's stimulating your vagus nerve. And so
Wow.
what that vagus nerve does is it hits the reset button on your heart, basically. And so you go, and if you hit it hard enough, it'll go to zero, because we do this in the field with it's actually a chemical called adenosine that we give to when somebody's heart rate's going like 200, we give them adenosine, and it just massively pings their vagus. It's a vagus stimulator, basically. It sends you back to zero, and then the heart rate when it comes back, it's 65 beats or whatever. So that's really what you're doing, is a lesser version of that. Every time that you're doing your breathing, you're stimulated for you when you go in very quickly. Is you're stimulating that because now your body knows how to do it, and it just goes, oh, this means, it goes, oh, this little thing, this little reminder, it means stimulate the vagus nerve. So it does. So now all of your sympathetic fight or flight response hormones go bye-bye, and you go out of high beta brainwave state, which is the anxiety state, to theta, and other, or you could go to alpha. It depends on what's happening. But you go any other state, basically, any other brainwave state besides high beta, and then you're not feeling that.
Wow. Wow, that is so beautiful that you can bring that like medical perspective from your professional experience.
Yeah, it's fun because I get to teach. I'm teaching this stuff in mainstream emergency medicine, because it's so there's the science is so rock solid behind it now that I'm basically teaching almost like I teach about how the body's electrical, and then all your hormone system. We don't think of hormones as being electrical, but there's nothing happening in your body that's not part of the electrical system. And so it's all, your whole body's an on off switch. So when you stimulate the off switch, you go, oh, it's all good. And that's, when people freak out, they hyperventilate and pass out, that's the body's natural response to just resetting the heart, the spasm that is the all on button.
All to take them to the same place, which is that 0 point energy, right? Just different ways of getting there. Powerful. Well, so let me ask you then, let's go back to movies for a second.
Movies,
if you were to say, just as we round it out, like what are a couple of your favorite, maybe a series and a movie itself, maybe, or just whatever, two of the top ones, and why? What are the ones you identify with the characters? Yeah, you like the story.
So the one that jumps out at me the most is Loki. It's called Loki. It's 2 seasons on Marvel. I actually watched it, Loki, I don't know, he's like the bad guy. I don't know if I want to watch this. I don't know if I really like that guy as a character. But it's got Owen Wilson in it, and it's pretty much a comedy, and it's hilarious. But it's also, the basis of it is they have to yank Loki out of his timeline because he messed up some timeline, and now he's back with this group. I forget what they're called, but because I haven't watched it in a while. But it's basically, they're the keepers of time, and they're organization, but they're just people. They're just people who are just like, I don't know, the boss tells us to do this, and we do it. And so over the period, Loki starts having his hero's journey, going from the villain to the hero. So you can see, but it's all based on, and they're jumping these timelines, and then eventually it turns out there's somebody who's created the policing of the timelines is malevolent, and so all these people are finding out that they've been holding up this horrible thing because they just thought they were doing their job. Anyway, so it just got great. It's just one thing I like about it is it really does do an amazing job of just going, okay, you're in this time, but now you're in this time, and now you're in this alternate reality, and it's just this because that's with you reach high enough energy within consciousness, that is what it is. It's not. I even look at it as like when I was, I used to look at it like a portal, and sometimes I still do because it's fun. But a portal is just like you're just stepping through that wall that doesn't exist, and it just seems like a change, right? So, and of course, we have to understand, we have to entertain the idea that this stuff actually is happening in a I don't want to say 3-dimensional way, but a way that can be perceived from the 3rd dimension. Let's say,
yeah,
that you could, you could actually watch somebody walk into something and just go somewhere else from on your end. That stuff's real. We did that, I think it's actually pretty well documented, um, the energetic levels in these areas. And then there's a lot of areas that the U.S. military, or well, just all that's just been closed off,
Suppressed.
and there's stuff built
Suppressed.
around it and
Yeah.
all that, right? Yeah, it's repressed and controlled, and there's a lot of that. Like it turns, there's some stuff coming out now, these congressional hearings, and that one of the guys was saying there's like 163 of these things, massive underground bases just in the U.S. So anyway, I know it's a little sad. We probably want to go down that's a thing, but
Right.
anyways, the gist is what I'm trying to say is this stuff. A lot of this stuff that seems not like it can't be real is real in the sense that it is actually coming into our what we perceive of as this reality now. It actually is. It actually is. You're gonna see this stuff at some point in your lifetime, probably. We're seeing
Right.
the craft and all that that are just going here and then disappearing. That's they're just going through some dimensional plane that we can't access with our physical senses.
Perception. Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
maybe they're going
Right.
somewhere completely different. But there's no difference between those two. Because really, if you go all the way back, return all the way to 0 point. There's only one of them. So anything you look at as a portal that's connecting to this portal nearby or this portal that's on the opposite end of the universe, it isn't any different from the perspective of source, because source is nothingness, and nothingness already exists everywhere.
Hmm.
Does that make
Wow.
sense?
It
So
does.
that's kind of a
Vast.
more nuts and bolts way of looking at from the bottom up to go, okay, I can go anywhere I want because I'm already there. And I think that really is the level of consciousness that these beings of the technology are tapping into to actually make that their perspective of reality within their VR or within our VR to witness it.
Right. It's
So the cool thing is that going back to zero to go anywhere like this, you can do it. Anybody can develop the ability to do that in their mind. I mean, by just getting in a theta brainwave state.
right. And
Astral
we
projection.
all get
I don't.
there in
I
our
don't see this astral. Yeah.
say that again.
I say astral projection. I don't see it
Oh,
as astral. The old concept of astral projection. I don't see it that way because I see it more like that's just a
simultaneous.
way. That's a three-dimensional way to process it. It's like a transitionary perception, like remembering your past life and kind of thinking I'm more that than everything else. There's
Right.
nothing wrong with that. In fact, when you're experiencing it, you have to experience it that way because that's the point, right? And it's amazing, but it's not the high. Again, that's just the next level of our perception of the game.
It's it's so fast. I mean, all of this fascinates me, and I think I'm somebody who's been a seeker, a curious person. I think all these traits, these archetypal energies of wanting to learn and see and grow, and I think that's an orientation to life. I think a lot of people, if they're not having that experience, I think a lot of people desire that experience because we're naturally curious. We're naturally seekers. We're naturally knowers. We also know a lot of what we seek, but it's like we have to re-experience it in the physical to say, oh yeah, I know that. Right. Oh yeah, I already
Yeah,
mastered that like 10 other lifetimes, but it's good to acknowledge it
yeah.
again.
Ultimately, what I just said is really escaping the karmic wheel. That's what it means.
Yes.
So escaping, understanding past the point that you're in reoccurring lifetimes and that you're just all the lifetimes. That is escaping the karmic wheel. So once you go there, you're already home and you've already experienced it all. You just can't perceive it. But you literally experienced every single thing that can ever be experienced. And now you're just kind of watching the reruns from a place where your face is so pressed against the glass that you think you're in the story.
Right, right. It's so good. I mean, it's so good, and I so appreciate having people in my life because I do. I feel very fortunate that I have people in my life that'll journey to these places and ponder these things and ask these questions. And even if an answer or whatever doesn't immediately appear, just then going into the muse about it, going into that in between
Yeah.
space you were talking about. We go into the in between
Yeah.
space and say, what I've been looking into or feeling or getting downloads about is this. And then, my other friend or compadre or whatever you want to call that will look into it too and say, I hadn't thought about that. And we'll both look into those things. And it's just,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's a wonderful place to play. And,
Well, yeah, because the average, conversation you're going to have with somebody who's not into this stuff, they're just going to, they're going to be, it's so not ready for it that they're going to, it's might trigger them.
Correct in some way.
Yeah.
And then it can also, I've certainly witnessed that in people in my spheres of friends and family, is that it just shut down. It just shuts down the conversation because they're just not interested and not of the vibration. And they want to hang with that. And that's
Yeah.
okay too. But it's really sweet when you can find podcasters talking about it, when you can see it in movies, because there's lots of ways to
Yeah.
bring it to life. Even if I'm just speaking to some of the people that I know. Some people write me privately in emails or on my comments, and they feel alone. Nobody in their
Yeah.
family is speaking this language. They can access some of these quantum realms to some extent, and they've seen a lot more. They seem to know a lot more things, and they're watching the movie too, like we're talking about. And they don't have a big community. I think community is going to be
Yeah.
so important in this next phase of the growth cycle that we're in. But even I will portal into podcasts where I don't know those people personally, but I am inside the podcast with them. Like I literally can feel if it's right, if it feels aligned. My
Yeah.
consciousness is like in the conversation with them as if I'm at the table with them, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
feel a part of it. I feel inside it.
Yeah.
And I invite people to feel that way too. And for me, I was going to mention there's so many films and series I can mention because for some reason I'm discovering a lot more now, and I'm really opening to it. So I'm having a good time paying attention to what some newer filmmakers or people who are writing new kinds of storylines, what they're bringing to the table. One of the series that a good friend of mine recommended to me was Timeless. It's on Hulu. It's on Hulu. Timeless is on Hulu. And that was the first show in a long time that got my attention. Of course, I mean, I can mention so many, but let me just at least reference Once Upon a Time. That's a story of like magical storybook characters, but it's live.
Was that the Reeves, the one of
No,
back in the 80s, early 80s?
that was the Somewhere in
Oh
Time.
no, no. Oh,
What
Somewhere Time. Yeah, yeah, okay.
Once Upon a Time. Yeah, no, but that's another one that's like, again, those seeds were
Yeah.
planted a long time about time travel. There's a Christopher Reeves movie called Somewhere in Time, and it's
Mhm.
got a time bending
That's what I
element.
was thinking of. I
Yeah.
don't think I saw the whole thing. But I do remember that he was time traveling in his mind.
Right. That one was really good. But think about it in the 80s. There was a Time Bandits. I don't
Yeah,
even remember that, but Time Bandits was
I
a
do.
show,
Yeah.
a movie.
It was weird. It was weird, but I loved the time travel part of it as a kid. I was like,
Me
oh, it's
too.
kind
We
of
could
weird and creepy. I think it
extract
was, yeah,
what we needed. We totally did. I don't know. Maybe I was like 10 or
yeah,
something when that came out. I'd have
yeah,
to look back and see,
yeah,
but I remember the same thing. It was strange, but I loved the
yeah,
concept. And so there's
yeah,
this Once Upon a Time series where they're going back and forth between like a real life magical world in the United States and truly like the fantastical magical realm where they're like Red Riding Hood or Snow White and stuff like that. And they
yeah.
travel with
Oh, okay.
magic beans between the realms, things like that. So that's
Oh,
fascinating. But Timeless was the first show, I think it was made in like 2018, I want to say. So not too long ago. And where there literally is a time machine. And then there's a bad guy
okay.
character who like captured the time machine and is traveling through time and changing history. And the people in modern time are completely unaware that history just changed because he did something hundreds of years ago and messed up the timeline,
Yeah,
right? Because to them it's only their normal. Once it
yeah,
got erased from the timeline, it's just a powerful concept if people erase something in different times. And you can see if some bad actors or some people, with more nefarious agendas wanted to do that, it's
yeah,
really illuminating to see the agendas that play out in that show and also the characters that are trying to set things right, but traveling through time and seeing the impact, like one person lives that should have died, right?
yeah,
Or the opposite or the reverse, right? And dies that should have lived. It changes the timeline and it changes the things that we can know. And that has that impact of like multi-dimensional, everything's connected.
So there's, there've been theories back when you look at the movie Back to the Future, where he lays out, oh, that's going to be this alternate thing. But remember how he drew it with little linear branches. So I don't think that's actually how it works. I think you can loop things back however, if you have the right energetic or the portal to do it, um, or the energy or the technology within consciousness. I don't think going back is limited as we once thought it was, because we were looking at things through a different lens. It was linear, right? We're not multi-dimensional. And so when you look at it this way, this is the part that you can, all of that stuff you can always clean up by just going back to the concept that the everything everything that possibly can exist does exist that way. Now, is it going to be one that's going to cross your path as happening in something that we all agree is this one linear timeline? Maybe, maybe not. Probably, I mean, less the likelihood doesn't seem like it. And so far, we don't doesn't just come out every day for us, right? But when the energy changes from your perception point, that might be completely different. And I think, well, it is, because when you get into that theta brainwave state, you are perceiving things in this kind of loop. It's coming back. It's not like you're on this linear path, not for very long, maybe pieces of it, right? But not for very long. So I think that stuff could happen, and if it could, that means it already is. And I think that if you look at, say, like, just theoretically, it's just say that, like, a species that we think of as like the Greys, right? Which is very macro way, because if you generalize like that, you're not going to get it. There's a lot more. It's just like us. It's an infinitely diverse thing, right? So it's not like there's one agenda and there's one human-like agenda that we would understand, and it would be bad or be good. It's not like that. It's not
Right.
so anyway, so let's just still take this hypothetical, space being, and say that they have the ability to just travel, or to a certain extent, without limitation within consciousness. They're not bound. They wouldn't be bound by any of it. They wouldn't be bound by it. They could come. They could come watch the final, and then be going back in time and helping that happen, get to this. And I think that is kind of their perception point in some ways for some beings, or some time and dimensional traveling, is that they're traveling from the future to make sure they create the past that ends up being their future. That's like one of the kind of loops, and it's mirrored in that thing about, hey, I'm going back in time to be there for myself. They are doing that. They have all that going on too. So from a higher perspective point, and you could just generalize this and just say the higher self is, because it's moving faster, that means from our perspective that it's in the future. Wow. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So that's your future. So your higher self would be your future self. But from that perspective point, you don't see past, present, and future that way. It's all one now, because that's what you have access to. So why would you see it that way?
Right,
does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's just one example, but all those loops, coming back to the self, it's happening on all kinds of levels, because it's just the nature of the loop. It's just the way everything's designed.
Yeah.
But I think that you're most definitely not alone in that whole, like, hey, you went back and visited yourself, and it turns out, and then you remember, oh, that conversation I was having with the kid with this, it turned out it was me. Like, I've had a bunch of that stuff happen. Right. But then beings are sort of doing that with us too, through much more spread out DNA, basically.
Right.
So they think that's part of so there's like, did they see us, some beings anyway, or some levels of consciousness, whatever you want to call it, see us as like if they're to some certain extent seeing a past, present, and future, they see us as their past selves, because they see everybody as them. Right? So if you see everybody as yourself, as the other self, then everybody in the past is that which made you who you are now.
Wow.
That's just one of so many layers of ways to look at it, and different angles that are not just being looked at it within consciousness, but also that's just one of the things that level of consciousness is looking at. It's not like, oh, I have this one thing I'm doing. It's just one of the infinite things that's swirling around.
It's so good. It's what's especially good is to enter the frequency for those that resonate, to play in a conversation like this, to allow yourself to have a conversation with yourself, and know you are this too, right? To just play in
Yeah.
the possibility, even if you just say, I'm willing to believe that there's other versions of me, other places. That's all now.
Yeah.
It takes what we believe to be creation in the way we were conditioned to believe creation works, that it's just this
Right.
linear trajectory and its evolution over
Yeah.
time. um,
Yeah.
that there's a whole bunch of other realities that we can access at any point. And I guess I would say, the other show that I've just recently learned about was this series called Sense8. I had several friends mention
Oh
that
yeah.
to me, and
Makes
I've
sense.
been watching that. And of course, again, there's always like the baddie that's chasing the good guys. It's a classic theme. But what's
Well,
really
it's always, yeah, it's the hero's journey, right? It's the hero's journey. It's
it's the
all
hero's
got
journey.
to
but
have that. And
but
yeah.
what's
Yeah.
especially powerful in that show is showing the higher self, like the true I am, connected at soul level
Oh,
with a soul group. And they can feel
wow. Okay.
each other and know each other and travel and visit with each other. And then they then, as the show goes on, they're actually like physically together. So, but for the longest time in the show, they're just like whatever that is, like projecting their consciousness, and they can have
Oh, I
visits,
gotta check that out.
and they can
Yeah,
borrow
because that's
like
next level.
next level, and they can borrow
Yeah.
skills from each other, right?
Yeah.
They may not know French, but the person in their soul cluster
Yeah.
knows French, so then they could
Yeah.
be
Their
fluent
shared collective
in French.
consciousness. Yeah. So that's I mean that's where we're headed. That's where we're headed, at least in some. I mean, obviously there's infinite different versions of that. But we're the next level that we're headed is tapping into that second part of the trinity I was talking about, where it's like, okay, you're the everything, you're the we are the ones that we've been waiting.
Yeah,
I mean, right? So we
exactly.
are and people talk about I had this thing for a long time. People talk about the return of Christ or return of Christ, but it's really a return of Christ consciousness, which for Christ too, he was at a collective. His perception of reality, or his vibrational state, was a collective consciousness level of perception.
Mm.
And so that's where we're all headed back. And as we integrate from individuals, that's how it's going to take physical form. Is we're going to be able to, telepathy and all those kinds of shared information, being able to tap in to intelligent infinity to actually download something specific for what you're going to use now. Like, I don't know about you, but I can't do that on. I get all kinds of great stuff that helps me, but I can't be like, okay, what is that actor's name? Like, I can't remember their name.
But it's getting better and better, and the more of us that access
Yeah.
the field, the
Yeah.
easier synaptically
Yeah.
that helps the rest of us.
Sure. Oh yeah. Yeah. It's a collective. It's collective. Yeah.
It's collective, and this
Yeah.
goes to the point that, while in some ways I think the world is going through maybe what seems to be in the movie, like the climax, like the climactic
Yeah.
moment where it almost is like the point of no return, how dark can it get?
Yeah.
And on the other hand, I can also see, like, we are so on the cusp of the greatest greatness and so much wonderful abilities to create and collaborate and co-create and quantumly create. Like, I mean, I think creation is
Yeah.
going to be a theme of this new age, this new, whether it's 1,000 years of peace, who knows how many years it's really going to be. But whatever this next cycle is, everything that we need to build and create, I think, is going to be available to us. And the more each of us comes online and activates that in ourselves, the easier it gets for other people who weren't accessing it yesterday, but can access it today. Right. And
Yeah.
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 What do you think about that?
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's again, it's all just about that. That's just the natural progression of just higher energy coming in, higher energy coming in. And again, from a three-dimensional, like time and space way, you can just say the unit, our galaxy is been moving into this like basically a storm cloud, and now this is out now. I don't know if you've seen this; it's pretty recent. But for a long time, I don't know if you've seen, we constantly stuff will pop up. Scientific journals will be like, "Whoa, the energy from that black hole is pointed straight at us," or "Oh, that quasar is pointed straight at us." And then, but I saw something a couple days ago where they discovered that all the planets outside that are away from us from the sun are heating up. They're getting a lot more energy,
Oh,
more than we are. And so it looks like we're just rotating into this area that's pretty much like a galactic, um, I want to say like a galactic lightning storm, basically. So
whoa.
it's pretty much like, so if you look at like the connectedness from a three-dimensional view in your head, because it's way easier to perceive it this way, is that every single planet and every single sun and every single celestial body that's large in terms of what we call mass, which would be energy, also equivalent to energy, um, that that stuff at times it aligns in a way where energy just goes boom right through it. It's like any other alignment. It goes click, click, click when the stuff lines up. And just like just like a solar alignment with the moon, you get the energy from that stuff. It aligns, and then there's energy flowing through it, right? Well, so we're coming into an area where that is like gonna volume on it's gonna turn way up. And so, I mean, there's even theories now dating back that some of the like Grand Canyon, some of those areas were carved out of like some massive galactic or should I say solar system, like massive lightning
Whoa.
situation that carved that stuff. So I don't know whether that's true or not. I have no idea. I've come across it. But the gist is we are that the science is there to show that we are the energy of the planet. We're moving somewhere that's energetically significantly higher in our local part of our galaxy. We for sure are. And we can go back now and you can look at some of the Grant Hancock and some of these guys are starting to draw the lines together, can show that like basically we kind of know that maybe that happens pretty sure maybe every 75,000 years ish that happens. And it
Oh,
goes with and it follows, of course, it follows the astronomical chart, you know, too. It's already all been written. You can just look it up on
right.
on some of the ancient texts. They already knew about it a long time ago, that something's coming. All the Vedic texts, all the stuff from India that's been around forever talks about this prophecy that the sun is going to blast this energy to the planet, and that it changes us. I mean, but it's in all kinds of texts, all kinds of texts. So now you can see that, oh yeah, this big galactic electric storm we're headed into it. And so yeah, I don't know
Wow.
how. I mean, but
Is
you're
there
talking
a
about
timeline for that? Is it another like 75,000 years or is it closer? Like,
no, oh no. This we're in the rotation. It's in the age of Aquarius.
so,
So we
okay.
don't know. Yeah.
So,
So it'll happen in the age of Aquarius, but I don't know at what point. So I think that's so really I think 2012 is probably just when we started outside edge of our solar system
right,
started tucking into it.
right.
So who knows how long it'll take for all to cook up. And then I think, historically, you probably have this large increase in energy that does cause some sort of level of enlightenment or heaven on earth type of concept, but then it falls, at least from a three-dimensional standpoint. But I think once you're in it, you don't perceive that. You're like perceiving something else, I think. But
Right,
we'll
right,
see.
right. Right.
We'll
Well,
see.
let's intend that it's only elevational and not
Yeah,
deep
yeah.
in us. Yeah.
So I guess the point is nobody really knows when it's going to happen, and that's the future is really even higher from higher level perception. It's tough to go into a spot and tell a limited perspective point what they're going to perceive when you're perceiving all of it as this big thing that's mixed up. You go, well, I can tell you about like a billion different versions that are possible right now, or
Right.
maybe some levels of consciousness can say I can have this certain level of probability within the location of your perceptive point. You know what I mean? So it's way more complex. And so I don't think anybody really gets clear future predictions at our level. Maybe you get some information, but it's always going to be a surprise when it actually arrives, because that's the point. That's what we're doing here,
Right.
is so that we don't already know everything, right? So
Right.
because if you already know everything, like
Why come?
then you don't get to experience this. Then you don't experience this. Yeah.
No,
So
exactly. Well,
anyway,
that's a powerful insight that you bring through here towards the end because it also there's a cosmology, there's
yeah.
there's more to this than just Joel and Marie have an opinion today. There's more,
Oh, totally. Yeah.
right?
There's
There's way
just if you're
more.
willing to look into it, yeah. If you go down the rabbit hole, you believe me, you won't come back out. I
Yeah.
promise. You're not gonna go down there and go, it was all bullshit, and then come back. You come back out like, none of that stuff made any sense. Like, I know that's not nobody goes into the rabbit hole and comes out. the people that
It
I've,
actually goes
unless
in.
they get maybe if they get a head injury or something, maybe.
Right.
Yeah,
It doesn't
but
consult
yeah,
some fact checkers. If you consult some fact checkers
yeah,
like that, don't even go down there, then you might not know. But if you
yeah,
go down at all, you come back
yeah.
with much more knowledge and awareness than you had before. So
Well, and the cool thing is eventually if you progress to where you'll go down there and just completely let go of the idea of what facts and proof is, and you just let whatever happens happen. You don't need to bring it out to prove it to anyone. It's your experience.
correct.
So if you leave it at that, then you get to experience a lot more, a lot more. It strips off so much restraint and limitation. And of course, it's always aligned with that strip off limit is always aligned with the higher ability to let go, which really isn't the ability. Letting go is just the off button. You just you
Right.
just let go of the you just let go of what you're holding on to because we're
Correct.
always just that's in this energy, that's what we're doing. If you
Correct.
just learn to just be like, oh, I'm going to not do that anymore, you make the conscious decision to do it and then practice it with, you can get to do it with 1, 2, 3 breaths and your body goes, oh,
Precisely. That's exactly our point here today, Joel. Well, thank you. Thank you for joining me and having these conversations. I'd love to have you back and let's surf some of these waves again sometime soon
worse.
because I think a lot of people are surfing them with us and they know they're surfing. And it's a lot more fun when you have people who are willing to get on and talk about it. And, we can have
Yeah.
kind of like a fireside chat about it. And then I'd also be curious for people to write in the comments like what are some
Yeah.
thoughts of things that you're journeying with and what are some time travel or quantum field quantum energy movies that you're watching or shows or series. It's always good to share because there's a lot of us on this channel that are curious about things like that. So
Do you
that
ever get it? Do you ever get any trolls? Do you ever get anybody go, hey,
you they're
you're
so
dumb?
obvious, it's rare. I'll have to
Yeah.
say it's pretty
Yeah.
rare,
Yeah.
but because
Yeah.
but I would also say when one pops through, it's such
Yeah.
a different frequency. They
Yeah.
out themselves, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah. Oh,
that
always. Yeah. That's what I say. You don't really have to respond to any of that stuff because it just does. People they're speaking from such a level of unconsciousness they don't realize how obvious they are to anybody who's conscious. So
correct,
I think
correct.
getting oneself into especially like if you have a channel where it's happening all the time, like some poor people do. So, but no, I think that's just those. You don't really need to respond to that at all. Like just let them, because then
No,
they're kind of just then they're standing up to themselves. It's like you don't. It's like you're playing this tennis match. If you just stop hitting the ball back, let them win, then they don't, and you win. But you don't have to look at that. You don't need to look at it that way, right? It's just like doesn't why bother.
that's exactly right. And
Yeah,
this is all part of that liberation we're talking about where you breathe easier, you live more relaxed, you're in that 0 point more often when you don't have to correct somebody else's experience or
yeah,
engage with that lower frequency that has no other intent than to sort of take channels down. Everybody responds to those kinds of things in their own ways, but if somebody's persistent and tenacious, which I really haven't had that, but I'll just like remove it finally from the channel and it
yeah,
goes away. I'm luckily enough I'm not somebody who is I don't know, people who are sharing like intel or their real thoughts about what they think is happening and timelines and all that
yeah.
stuff. I think they get a lot more of they attract more of those kinds of people.
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
think the
you attract people that
frequency,
are already ready for it, for
yeah,
sure.
that are already ready for it and or even want to engage with that at some level. And I think
Yeah.
for my channel, mostly the frequency is it's a pretty high frequency, and which means also not everybody on the planet is there.
Yeah.
It attracts a certain octave of frequency in a person. But no, I think I've been pretty fortunate and I feel a lot of gratitude for
Well,
that.
I think you're an interesting demographic um because you're the stuff that you're talking about is far enough along to when people get into that one, they don't need they still start getting it on their own, which is the point, right? But then that just doesn't create this massive market that stays around, right? Or maybe you get like a small group, a group that just stays around as part of their, because it becomes part of their spiritual process. Um, but you see what I'm saying though, right? So it's like
Totally.
it's a revolving door of people who are in this spectrum of readiness.
I think that's true of
Yeah,
most
yeah,
channels in
yeah,
general. And then
totally.
I also
Mhm.
think
Yeah,
there's a kind of gathering around the campfire. Like I still do that. I'll still go back to channels that or podcasts, not often, but there's some that I'll go back and it's just I've listened to them for so long. I'll make sure I check in and I receive the messages and get the
Yeah,
updates.
yeah,
And I
yeah,
think
for sure.
people that's that part of community too that
Yeah.
cannot be overstated. That I think it's going to be so important to all of us to have to give ourselves
Well,
permission to tap into that kind of
it's
frequency.
actually it's actually interesting. I think I've probably alluded to this in the past with comments on your page, but there's something about when you start to channel it, it immediately I'm just listening to the channel. But you know what I mean? I'm in this space within space
Yes.
with all of it as just what I'm observing, whether I look at it as you, Marie, or this higher connection, or just source, or all of that at once. It's just the sound of your voice as soon as it comes in with the little music. I'm so conditioned to go there with it that I
Right.
go there immediately,
We
which
didn't
is really cool. I know I can go to your channel anytime. Anytime I want to feel that feeling, all I gotta do is just listen to your voice and I'll be there. It's really cool. Really
I
cool.
love that, Joel.
Yeah.
I love that. And that is to have spaces where people can go, my channel and other places where you can go and just at the starter frequency, just at that first note,
Yeah.
whatever it is, and your body already knows and say, oh yeah, I'm going to quantum jump now. I'm just going to jump into that
Yeah.
space between space and I'm going to enjoy the bliss of like, in that hammock. It's like a hammock of grace where your soul can rest and receive. There's something so beautiful about that resting and receiving, and yet being an active participant. And it's not a passive process. You're fully
Yeah.
present, but you're so relaxed, you're actually being nourished. It's a nice balance, I think, in that space. So,
Yeah, I was going to say, I think a lot of people have a misperception about what attention is. Again, it comes back to that whole, I'm flexing all my muscles to pay this close attention. But in those levels, it's not like that. It's just an automated awareness that just you're just wide open receiving, right? So it's and the best way to get there is sort of by letting go of that whole focus. I mean, really, it's by letting go of focus. It's by just completely letting go of focus in a minute, not while you're doing something, because then you won't be able to do it at all. but when you're not doing something and you can just relax and you just completely let go of your thoughts, you lose interest in them. You just allow whatever comes in, and then now you're in pictures, and now you pretty much transcended thought. Those moments,
yes,
because that's really what thought and language is. It's just representation of you
frequencies.
know of pictures, kind of, in a way. And that's just one way to describe it. But, yeah.
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 Yeah, it's so good. It's fascinating. It really is so fun to travel with you and journey with you and put words to the things we're talking about when really they're like felt vibrations. They're things that you feel
Yeah.
with your senses. But we play between both of those worlds where there's language and no language and language and no language, right? And I'm so
Absolutely.
grateful to the people who hang with us and are in this conversation. And let's have Joel back and surf more quantum understandings and some waves of insights together. And we'll see you hopefully again soon for another podcast. So
Yes. Yes. Yes,
yeah.
please.
Yes, yes, exactly. Yes,
Excellent.
please. So until next time, we send blessings to everybody and blessings in your quantum journeys and your time travelings and you're even watching movies that take you into that space or listening to other channels that lead you there. So have a great day, everyone. We're so glad you joined us today. Blessings.